Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
I'm Jen.
And this is Steve.
And today we're going to give our hot take on the game we just finished playing, Aquatica. But also, hey, let's celebrate. It's our 1 year anniversary. This is 1 year from the first recording of the Board Game Hot Takes podcast. And so we're also going to talk about our origin stories. We're going to talk about the origin of the podcast, how it came to be, and why we're doing it. But we're also going to give you a little introduction to each of our 5 hosts that either are regularly or occasionally make appearances on the show. Everybody's with us today for the first time, and you get to learn a little bit about us. So we're going to jump into that in just a few minutes. But before we jump into Aquatica or that, we've got some poll results to go over. So this week, I asked on Twitter, have you ever bought an updated version of a board game you already own? And I said I haven't, but I could see some unique situations where I might. So I want to hear from you guys if you've ever done that. But the reason this came up for me was because there were a couple games that have some kind of updated versions or reprints that have been kind of on my mind lately. And one of them was Descent. So I used to have Descent 2nd edition. It's called Descent Journeys in the Dark. And there was just a lot of news this week about a big new updated version of it with cool new artwork, and the early reviews are looking really awesome. So I thought, hey, should I consider getting that? Except I hated the first version, so I decided not to. But that led me to believe, I think there's a lot of people that probably had the first version and are still going to buy the second version, or maybe they had Great Western Trail and they're going to buy the new one, or they had the original Rococo and they bought the deluxe edition one. So have any of you guys ever done that? Have you owned a game and then bought an updated version of it?
Yeah, I've got multiple versions of Monopoly. That's about it.
Okay, cool. Chris?
Well, I know this is just about as exciting, but I did at one point buy the deluxe edition Yahtzee, even though I had the regular edition Yahtzee already.
All right. Yep, there's some classic editions there. Jen, I think you got an interesting story here.
I do. I actually went backwards. So as we all know, I bought the 20th edition of Castles of Burgundy, which is the best game on the planet and my favorite game ever. And just so many things about it stunk Ravensburger. And so I had to go and bid on an original version of it because it's nowhere to be found whatsoever. So I crazy overpaid for an original Castles of Burgundy or whatever. I don't even know if it's original, but the legit one with the 2 sheeps and stuff you can actually read with eyeballs that are over the age of 40. So love it. Still 17 shades of green.
So you're the only person that went backwards and got the old edition instead of the new modern updated edition.
It's awesome. It's still wrapped. It's still there. I'm just waiting to, find a person that actually wants to play Castles of Burgundy with me. So it's cool, whatever.
I'm not sure if that says more about Jen or Ravensburger for making a game that was better the first time, at least in Jen's eyes.
So instead of going newer edition or older edition, this is embarrassing, I've actually just gone parallel. I parted with a game and then later reacquired the same exact game, same edition, just because I missed it and I wanted it back. So that's going parallel. Another not so exciting story.
No, I'm actually tempted to do that with a couple games that I got rid of and kind of wish I hadn't. So I can see that. I can understand that, Adam. What was the game? What game did you get rid of and then later reacquire?
It was The Expanse. The artwork and lack of friends to play the game with were what drove me to sell it in the first place. And nothing has changed, and I bought it again.
Well, none of us, it sounds like, actually bought a newer version of a game, which is the question I actually asked. But on our poll, quite a few people had. So I gave 4 options here. I said number 1 was yes, and I'll do it again. Number 2 was yes, and it was a mistake. Number 3 was no, but I would. And number 4 was hell no and never will. So out of the 31 votes on this poll, 55% said yes, and I'll do it again. So 55% of the people that responded had actually replaced an existing game with an updated, maybe more deluxe version or version 2.0 that has updated rules or something like that. 0% said yes, and it was a mistake. So nobody's admitting to their buyer's remorse when they bought that updated version, at least. 39% said no, but I would. And that's how I answered it myself, because there's a couple of games that I could see, I've got a game that I love, and if a really great updated version came out, I might pick it up. And then 6% said hell no and never will. So that's somebody that is that would be a huge waste of money.
How many games actually qualify for this? It can only be a handful, maybe 30 or 40 games.
Yeah, I think there's a decent amount. And it's the thing is that the games that get updated and reprinted new editions generally are really loved games. And so I can totally see, some of the biggest games, probably some of the best sellers. Ticket the Ride, for example, had a big 10th anniversary edition that had all the unique trains in it. Pandemic has had an updated 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary edition. So even some of the biggest games of all time that aren't necessarily, I guess basically almost everybody's had a game probably that could be updated. So even if it's not a ton that have done that, but like Yido, Rococo, Suburbia, any game that's been out for 5 to 10 years and people love it, it's getting a big kickstarted second edition version in a lot of cases. Our friend, this is Dean from Meepletown, said Suburbia and Glenmore 2 come to mind, and he was pleased with both of them. And so Glenmore 2 is a great example of a game that the original one had cool Euro game, pretty basic mechanisms. Glenmore 2 added a whole bunch of additional modules. So it had the base game, but then you could switch out the gameplay in it. So that kind of added new gameplay mechanisms. And then Ryan said, not yet, but Great Western Trail might be the one. Have you guys seen the updated Great Western Trail second edition yet? Have you seen any of the artwork or anything for it?
Just the box cover.
Yeah, exactly, Chris. The box cover art, and that's enough.
That's enough to do it. Yeah.
That's enough.
That's right. Yeah. Well, even the other components look pretty cool too. So yeah. All right. Cool. Well, let's jump into a description of Aquatica. In Aquatica, you play as an ocean king of a tribe of merfolk that need to explore the ocean and discover new lands and recruit new population, and ultimately prove your dominance by becoming the most prosperous tribe in the ocean. Each player starts the game with the same 6 starting character cards that do a variety of things, as well as an asymmetric king card with a powerful effect. You'll also start the turn with 4 trained manta rays that each offer a different effect when activated. On your turn, you'll take one main action by playing one of the cards in your hand to the discard pile and taking the action printed on it. One type of main action you may take is recruiting other character cards from a face-up set of 6 cards in a community row. These are called ocean cards, and they each have their own unique main actions printed on them. Each of those spots in the card row has a coin cost of 0 to 5, and when a card is acquired, all of the cards shift to the left and a new card is placed face up in the 5 cost spot. You then place that card in your hand, and it is available to use on your next turn as a main action. One of the ways you may pay the cost of those cards or get other extra actions on your turn is by flipping over one of the manta rays in your supply and getting the benefit shown on the bottom of the manta. That manta's benefit isn't available to be used again until it is flipped back over. Another type of main action is conquering or buying one of the 6 face-up location cards that are in a community row on the board. Each location card has a conquer cost, paid with tridents, and a purchase cost, paid with coins. And when you take either of those actions, then you take the card and put it on your personal location board. The location board is dual layered, and you will slide the location between the 2 layers up until the card just above the top symbol on the right-hand side is covered. Each location card has a variety of symbols on the left-hand side of the card. These may represent a coin value, trident value, or an icon that allows you to take other actions that you can exploit to get the benefit immediately as an extra action on your turn. When you exploit that card, you slide it up so that the top symbol is covered, and the next available space is the top symbol showing. When you've exploited all of the available benefits on the left-hand side of the location card, then you may get the benefit of an extra manta ray if it's printed on the bottom of the card, and then that card is available to be scored, and that can be done with a main action or one of the bonus actions showing the treasure chest icon. You take that location off of your board and place it in a scoring pile to be counted at the end of the game. Each player's starting hand comes with a card that when played allows you to return all of your character cards from your discard pile to your hand and flip all of your mantas over again so they're available to be used again. There are 4 variable goals that can be achieved each game, and they are worth more points to the players that achieve them first. When a player meets the condition of the goal, they can give up one of their starting mantas and place it on the goal to show they achieved it. The game ends when a player has achieved all 4 of the goals in the game, or if the ocean character deck is empty, or if the location deck is empty. Players then add their points from their scored location cards, points from achieved goals, and 1 point for each character card in their hand, and the player with the most points is the winner. Aquatica was designed by Ivan Tuzovsky and published by Cosmodrome Games. So this game was recommended by our listener, Brian Schindler. Brian, thank you for the recommendation, and thanks for being a regular listener and chatting with us on Twitter. So let's start with gameplay and mechanisms. And Adam, why don't we start with you? Anything, just throw out one of the mechanisms that stood out to you with this game.
I'm going to quote Rodney Smith here and say this game was comborific. What this game is you're trying to line up all the cards, all your characters to make the ultimate combo and just smash it and get all these points. I was not able to capitalize on that mechanism to its fullest potential, but I certainly enjoyed it. I saw the potential for it, and just the comboing, racking up points or cards or tridents is cool. It stands out very much.
Yeah, and my favorite part of that combo puzzle was the locations that you would either buy or you would conquer them, right? And so then you'd put them in your little tableau, and each of them had a series of icons down the left-hand side that all give different benefits, and some of them were blank. So there was a fun puzzle to be like, okay, this turn, I'm going to use this particular icon, and I'll exploit that location. It shifts it up, so then that icon isn't available anymore, but there may be a blank one underneath it or nothing. I just love that whole puzzle of that thing, and when to try to push those up and use your stingray, your manta ray to flip over to push it up, or use a card to push them up so that you had the next one available and set yourself up for another turn. That was super fun. Me also, I was right there with Adam. I think he beat me by 1 point, so I ended in 4th place, and we got crushed by Steve and Chris tonight. I just did not figure out what was going on. But that was a fun, enjoyable experience for me to try to do that tonight. Steve, what about you? Anything that stood out to you particularly?
I think the most unique mechanic is probably the cards shifting up, or what they called exploiting the new depth of the location. I don't think I've ever seen a mechanic quite like that before. And then other fun little mechanics, once you've used up your location, you can take another action to convert it into points. So that was fun.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think you guys kind of hit the high point, which, as Steve said, was the depths. In keeping with the theme of the game, that the deeper you went, the more options you had in terms of the superpowers that went with your cards. And then eventually you reached the bottom, and then you got to score the card itself. And I thought that was really interesting. But what I really liked was the fact that this took a number of mechanisms of different... there's nothing particularly unique about it, like completely unique, like I'd never seen anything like that before. But it pulled together a number of tried and true techniques and mechanisms that I thought worked well together and created for an overall experience that was a little bit more interesting than a lot of games that I played. So it had a bit of a deck building aspect to it. It had a bit of a tableau building aspect to it. And there was just enough difference in those pieces and the way they were put together that it was different than a game like, say, Star Realms. So that, I thought, made it a very interesting game.
I'm going to circle back to this in my final thoughts, and I'll mention it again. But yeah, what you're saying, Chris, is exactly how I feel and felt about Lost Ruins of Arnak. And this game made me feel very similar. The gameplay of just, okay, what are the 2 or 3 different things that I can use, different mechanisms I can put together to try to get the one thing that I want to get done this turn. So I had a really similar feel with that. All right, so let's just jump right into the production of Aquatica. Steve, why don't you start this time? Anything that stood out to you with the production?
I thought the artwork on the character cards was nice. Wasn't particularly relevant to the actions on the cards.
No, come on. There was the angler card, and basically an angler is something that looks, like harmless and then ends up being destructive, right? And then the angler was a picture of a beautiful woman sitting in a throne, but you could see on her face there was actually a huge mouthful of teeth underneath that. So, that represented the name, I guess, but did it represent the actions? I can't even remember what the action was, so maybe.
Conquer a location.
It was a conquer a location.
Oh yeah,
not
right.
really relevant.
Exactly.
How would that be relevant to an angler?
Yeah, because she's taken something where people didn't even realize it was a threat, and then she's going and discovering it. I don't know. Yeah, well, okay, fair enough.
Anglerfishes are very, 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 very deep sea predators, which are very dangerous with big teeth.
Okay, good information there.
All right, Chris, you're a big production focused person. What did you think about the production here?
I had mixed feelings on this. I thought that the art was really interesting. I enjoyed the cards. For those who have not seen the game, it's an interesting combination of sea life and humanity, which Tim already alluded to. You had the anglerfish was a part person and part anglerfish. You had a turtle that was part turtle, part person, and there was a card that I just thought, we saw a bunch of them, and I thought it was really amusing, called the diplomatic crab, which was a man who looked kind of like a crab. So I thought that was an interesting idea, and I enjoyed that. What I didn't enjoy was that the cards repeated themselves too much. There could have been a little bit more variety in the cards, And I think about this compared to other deck building games like Star Realms, where I guess you look at the base deck and there's not a lot of variety, but once you start expanding it out. So I imagine this is a game that could benefit from a little bit of expansion.
Yeah, Chris, sorry, I want to just add on to that because I agree with you. Now, this is maybe not just a production issue, and it's not just because the artwork that was the same, but I felt like this definitely could have benefited from some more variety in that deck, even from a mechanical perspective. Like, there was 2 of each card, and there weren't that many cards. What was it? 9 unique cards each in the Ocean set. And that it did start to feel like, whoa, okay, there's not that much to explore here, and I think it could get stale fairly quickly.
Yeah, and the cards didn't feel that dynamic. Like, sometimes when you have a really good card in a game, it feels like, yep, that's the breaker for me. That's the one that's going to help me win this game. This one, it felt like there were minor swings in one direction or another, but there was nothing about the cards that really were huge drivers in how the game might go. In terms of the art, there was some real oddities in here, and I think you brought this up, Tim, when we were talking about the art on the backboards, the player boards. There was some stuff that I think none of us could actually figure out what the heck they were getting at. There was a whale chained to the bottom of the ocean, and then some other weird crap chained to the bottom of the ocean. I have no idea what it was supposed to be doing, but it was interesting, a little bit strange when you really thought about it. One thing that I thought was actually brilliant, and I would like to see the actual physical version of this game, just to see this, but there's a 2-layer player board, and where that becomes particularly useful is in the location cards, because as a couple of us have already talked about, you use these cards depending upon the depth at which they're located, and you slide the card to different depths in order to accomplish different things. And the way you do that is you put it into this 2-layer player board and then slide it up, and it blocks off the other pieces and it shows you the depth that you're actually at. And I think that could be a really nice mechanism. And, so many games we've all played where you just have cards stacked on top of cards and it just gets really unwieldy. And this struck me as a really elegant way to solve that problem. And I'd love to see how that plays out in the physical edition.
Yeah, Chris, I think you nailed it with those dual-layer player boards are kind of the star of the production show for me with the way those cards fit in there, slot in there. You can read what your next depth level is right there by the way that's designed. So, the manta rays look cool too. A little plastic.
Okay, you weren't going to leave anything for me? Nothing?
Yes, you're right. Manta rays are
No,
cool.
I thought the manta rays were the star of the show. They're these awesome little plastic toys, mana toys with cool, like your faction markings on one side and then the ability that they give you on the other side. And I love those things so much.
I want to get this game in my hands. It looks pretty neat and tactile. And then the toy factor and the mechanical card sliding up the thing factor is just cool.
Yeah, okay. Cool. All right. Well, let's jump into standout moments of the game. I'll just start here. The standout moment of the game was that we were probably 8 turns into the game, and I was just about to convert my first location into a treasure. And I looked down, and Steve had converted 6 already. And I knew that game was lost, but I didn't care. I had a great time playing to that point and recognized, wow, I see what I missed. Like all the stuff that he picked out, I was focusing on getting locations that gave me a couple more bucks. He was getting locations that let him convert stuff into treasure cards and do all these other cool abilities. So it was a fun learning experience for me. And I don't know if the game is always that swingy where someone can get quite that big of a lead on other people, but I don't think I'd let it happen again if I played it again. So Adam, what about you? Any standout moments for you?
Yeah, it was going on. I didn't really have a good sense of what to do, but I was trucking along. Like, okay, I got some good combos coming up, and I'm gonna really unleash one here pretty soon. And I look over it, and I'm like, all the character cards are out. That's an in-game trigger, right? And then we're like, oh yeah, shoot, it is an in-game. Rewind a little bit here. Then everybody has one more turn, and that kind of I really didn't plan ahead on this one kind of moment was fun. But the game is, you can see how it could be relatively quick. We managed to stretch it out a little bit, but you could see how you could play this game maybe over and over. I don't know, like 2 times in an hour or something like that. If everybody knew what they were doing, because there's only 18 character cards, and once that expires, boom, that's an in-game trigger.
Yeah. All right, Chris, what about you? Standout moments.
Yeah. I think Steve's dominance with the location points was probably the same. It was the same for me. I thought I was doing really well. I had snagged a couple of there are overall bonuses that anybody can get by accomplishing tasks, like by having a certain number of locations, having a certain number of locations of a particular type. And I thought I was doing pretty great. I had some nice locations with big point values, and I had a couple of those overall bonuses that I had managed to get the first place on. And then I had this big plan about these things that I was going to do with these remaining locations. I had a 9-point location sitting in there, and that is a pretty significant swing in this game. And all of a sudden the game's over, and I looked over at Steve's tableau, and he had, it felt like 20 cards sitting out there all ready to score. It was a bit of despair. But at the same time, I looked at it and said, well, at least next time I'd have a better idea of how to play. In the meantime, we'll bow down at Steve and his impressive skills at building up location points.
So, Steve, our standout moments were that you were amazing at this game. What was your standout moment?
Yeah, you guys are trying to steal all my thunder here. But more specifically, the way that happened, it didn't just happen over time. I was specifically, when possible, taking cards that had the treasure conversion icon on them. I think more plays will tell more, but I think one of the tricks to this game is you don't need to build a big deck. You've got all the basic skills you need already with your characters. You can buy a few extra characters that might work towards your specific plan, but I'm really just trying to pair your character actions with the location bonuses, and just timing it all. So it's just really fun to try to get all the timing to work out so that your cards are ready to be converted into treasure when the treasure icon is going to come up next. And, use your location action that lets you bump depths on another card before you do that so that you can convert that one into a treasure. And just the whole comboing of not just the locations themselves, but how everything played together.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, let's final thoughts here. Would you request to play the game again? Chris, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think I would. I really enjoyed this game, and I really had a good time. I really would like to dig into this more and learn a little bit more about the strategy behind it, because I felt like Steve and I happened to stumble into relatively good strategies that got us a decent number of points. You and Adam struggled a little bit more, Tim, because probably not for any reason other than the fact that you hadn't yet figured out the strategy. But this feels like one where once you get the strategy, there's all kinds of things you could do to maximize points, and I'd really like to explore that a little bit more and see how that goes.
I'll go next. I really liked this game. I liked exploring this game. I think it does some things really well. I mentioned it's very close to Lost Ruins of Arnak, and we reviewed that on the show. And lately, Lost Ruins of Arnak is the only game on my table that I'm playing solo. I love it. I just go back to it constantly because it's such a fun puzzle. Now, this had the same drawback that Lost Ruins did, is that you have a fun turn. When you're taking your turn, you get to try to combo all these things together and fit everything together. But then when everybody else is going, you don't really care what they're doing. There's no, and it can take a while. It can take a while for someone else to get through those things. So I think this is going to be an awesome solo game. I think it's going to be a pretty good 2-player game. But I think at 3 or 4, for what you get for the gameplay experience out of it's probably a little slow. Although it played fairly quickly. Like Adam mentioned, I think you could get this done in 30 to 60 minutes. But I don't really care. I don't care about you guys like talking through the 15 things you did on your turn to buy one building. That's not really interesting to me. So I'm not sure how great this is at a larger player count. But I loved it. I had a great time exploring it. This is a game I'm very tempted to pick up. I think I could see this even, Lost Ruins is great because I can knock out a solo game in 30 minutes and get all these combos and fun going on. I bet I could knock this one as a solo game out in 15 minutes. Quick to set up and quick to just get right into. My only drawback with it, I think, was the diversity in the ocean deck. There just wasn't that much variety there. So, it kind of felt like you saw everything, and that's always a bummer in a game like this, where it'd be fun when there's cards that, you only see every third game, and so you got to try something new this time. It looks like the expansion does include some additional cards for the ocean deck, so this feels like a game that if I bought it and played it a few times, I'd probably want to add the expansion to it for some more variety. But otherwise, it had a lot of variety. The location deck seemed very unique. All the different mana abilities, the king cards, the starting player abilities were all a little bit unique and give you some variety. So I really liked it. I will definitely be requesting to play this again. I could definitely see picking this up for myself. I think it does so much better than what a lot of quick, short playing engine builders do. Splendor is a classic example, and that at least this gives you a lot of variety in how you go about playing the game. Like Splendor, you can play that game, but it's always the same thing. Buy these gems to get these other gems to get these other gems to maybe get one of the nobles, right? In this one, there is, for a fairly simple rule set, a lot of fun things to do. I love the diversity in the icons in the location cards. That seems like it's always going to create a fun and different puzzle to kind of figure out how you can manipulate them. So yeah, I really like this. What about you, Adam? How do you feel about Aquatica?
Yes, I would request to play this again. I want to play this game again and, like Chris was saying, explore the different strategies and see how I can link those combos up better in future plays. I'm very tempted to pick it up as well. It's just quick and simple, light rules overhead, like you said, Tim.
All right, Steve?
Fun.
I just bought it. So, yes,
Good
I
answer.
would request it to play again. I'm hoping to play it again. I was just looking at the expansion, and I just bought the expansion too. Additional characters, additional locations, something called tribes, so a little new game mechanic there. Some additional king cards, and it lets you play up to 5 players. So, yeah, I had a good time, and I'm looking forward to playing it some more.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was a big hit for all of us tonight. That's great. Let's jump into our 1-year anniversary conversation about our origin story right after this. All right, welcome back. So today is our 1-year anniversary, and we're going to talk about our origin story. We're going to start by talking about why we created the Board Game Hot Takes podcast, or what was the origin of the podcast itself. And to start there, I want to hand this off to Adam, because it was really Adam that initiated this idea with me. So Adam, talk a little bit about what excited you or what inspired you to put together a podcast.
I think it was after being invited to the Dads on a Map podcast. That's a podcast I was listening to regularly, and they have a nice Discord group, and they were playing a lot of games online. The host invited me to be on one time, and I was a little hesitant at first, like, hey, I don't know if I want to talk to some people on the internet and have it be a recording out there in life. But after that experience, it was kind of fun to be creative and, I don't know, get my thoughts out there, hang out with friends, talk about board games. I brought it up with you, Tim, as kind of a joke, and I think Chris might have been there too, like, hey, we should do a podcast since I love talking about board games so much. And then Tim kind of ran with that. He was like, yeah, let's do a podcast. Okay. We kind of got together and worked out some goals and ambitions that we had, ideas for the show, bounced them back and forth off each other, and then we ran with it.
Yeah, my memory was that you told me about that you got invited on that podcast, and I went and listened to the episode, and I was like, that seems like so much fun. I wish I could do that. And of course, I'm an avid podcast listener, board game podcast listener, so I've been listening to podcasts for years and always had in mind, like, oh man, if I was in that conversation, I would have said this, or they missed this whole important point. So I kind of had an idea in my mind of what a podcast would look like to me. So Adam texts me and goes, hey Tim, you want to start a podcast? And about 5 minutes later, I had an email written up like a page and a half long. Yeah, here's all the things that I'm thinking. And I was just like kind of total brainstorming in this email. I think that's pretty much the format that we ended up with, and the name and everything. Like, I just spurted out a bunch of stuff, and Adam goes back and like, yeah, and these are my goals. So let's just do a test recording. So we were, at this point, it was in the pandemic, and me, Adam, Steve, and Chris were meeting together online every week anyway, just to play a game. So Adam and I were like, hey, let's just, after game night this week, we'll just jump in and we'll record and talk about the game and see how it goes. And so we just kind of threw it on Steve and Chris right at the end of the, while we're in the gameplay. Hey, we're going to start recording a podcast. You guys want to be a part of it? And Chris is like, heck yeah, I want to do it. And Steve was like, no, I don't want to stay up that late. We were just playing, we just scheduled to play Pan Am, and we scheduled to play, I think we were going to do Space Base. We were going to do 2 shorter games that night. And so we got done with those 2 games, and we stopped and we recorded it. It worked out pretty well. Do you guys remember that experience? Anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I remember it. I remember you saying that, you guys saying that, and my first reaction was, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but it sounds like fun. I mean, who would ever want to sit around listening to us talk about games? Obviously, somebody does, because we've got a few listeners out there, and to this day, I'm actually amazed and humbled at the idea that anything we're saying is actually interesting enough that folks want to listen to it. And I'm impressed that you guys actually came up with the idea and made it happen against all odds.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that kind of drove me after that was that we recorded that episode, and I went back and listened to it that night, and I was like, this is a podcast I want to listen to. Like, this is exactly what I want in a podcast. I want to listen to some friends BS with each other and talk about the game they played and get into the mechanisms and talk about what they liked and what they don't liked and tell some stories around it. And it was so much fun that we just went from there. We just stuck with it.
I figured if it was even just the 3 of us listening, that was enough for me. It would be a fun project to try to record some stuff, edit it, make it sound decent, and then have something to listen to. So I was happy with 3 listeners and like some friends and family that feel sorry for us. That was good enough for
Yeah.
me.
Now,
I've kind of gotten to the point where it's almost like just having the conversation is enough in itself. If nobody ever listened to it, just the
Exactly.
fact that we get to sit and BS about the games for a little while after we play, that's enough.
yeah, I agree. That's one of the things I love about it is I just like talking about the game. And sometimes I forget that we're even recording. It's just like sitting there chatting away, and then we have something to show for it at the end. Jen got involved because her and Adam and I and my wife Danielle had been playing some games online separately from our normal game night. And one night, I think it was when the Dinosaur World Kickstarter was happening, and they announced that they had put it up on Tabletop Simulator. And I was thinking about backing that game, so I was like, man, I'd really love to give this game a try and see if I want to back it on Kickstarter. And then it would be fun to talk about it because it's a new game. A lot of people are interested in it. So I hit the crew up, and Chris and Steve weren't available that week, but Adam was like, yeah, I'll play with you. So I invited Jen. She's a huge Jurassic Park fan, and she was like, heck yeah, I'm going to play a Jurassic Park game. So we got on, introduced her to Tabletop Simulator for the first time. And so that was Jen's first. So you can go back and listen to, it was episode 8. Yeah, so you can go back and listen to episode 8 with Jen's first introduction to podcasting and Tabletop Simulator and being a part of this. And at least she told me she had a great time after that. So anytime that we had a gap when somebody couldn't join us for a game night, then I just invited Jen out, and we found a game that was a good fit, and she's been joining us on and off ever since. How's that experience been for you? Did you have fun on that first episode?
Oh, that first one was so much fun. It was so tiring, but so much fun because we were learning that one in real time. And so like that one's like a labor of love was that very first podcast that we did together. It was fun. The narrative that came out of it, it was everything I loved about board gaming and everything I hated about board gaming, like all shoved up against each other. So that was kind of neat. If you can get through the Dinosaur World podcast on Board Game Hot Takes, recording it anyway, you can get through anything. And so that's how I feel about that one. And it just had enough like inside jokes and that like social piece of it. The narrative of the game allowed for us all to really connect, even when we were in 3 different locations so far away from one another. So that one gives me like the warm fuzzies because of when it happened and how it happened and who we were and what we were to each other. So I love it.
Now, Steve ended up joining us eventually because we just needed somebody, and he's always been happy to fill in when there wasn't a third person. So thank you, Steve, for doing that, even though you usually don't want to stay up late enough. Steve's first episode was episode 10, and that was the episode we were going to record. I think Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy was what we had on the schedule for game night that night, but that was one of Adam's favorite games. So we decided to save it. Adam had to back out last minute, and so we decided to save it for him. And Steve, Chris, and I all like Tapestry, so we played Tapestry, and Steve joined us to talk about the game. So, but Steve, you've been pretty willing to jump back in whenever needed. Sometimes last week, even without us even asking, you wanted to jump in and get into the conversation. So are you finding your sea legs? Are you having more fun with it?
I think honestly that for one thing we've just been ending the game nights much earlier and more predictably earlier. Some of those earlier game nights, I don't know if it was the games we picked or some of it was just getting used to the online interface, but we were ending games at 10:30, 10:45, and then another hour plus to do the podcast. It's just kind of late. But
Yeah,
now here we are already in the middle of the podcast, and it's only 9:24 my time. So.
Yeah, or that's an early one today. Yeah, I think we can all give credit to Chris. I think Chris finally figured out how to get through his turns faster. So I think Chris gets the credit for Steve joining us on the podcast.
All right, I'll take the hit. I'm the punching bag. I know.
He did well tonight.
Yeah, I try because I want to go to bed early too. So I'm with Steve on that one. One of the funny things about this show, or some of the fun things about this show, is that this all happened during the pandemic. And for me, for one, it was great to have a shining light in the middle of this pandemic that made every week so much more fun. But also, in the time that we were doing this, most of the time that we were doing this, I was on the road with my family because at the early part of the pandemic, my family and I decided that we were going to make a move from Los Angeles to Portland. And we spent about 7-8 months on the road traveling from place to place, visiting national parks. Those of you who listened to the podcast before probably heard me talking about it. And so every one of these episodes, I had these amazing memories of where I was when that episode was recorded or when I listened to it. Like I can remember driving around Yellowstone National Park, listening to the Dinosaur World episode. And my first thought was, oh my God, Jen is so funny. I'm actually looking forward to the point where we actually play a game sometime. I still have not played a game with her, so that day will come someday, and that'll be great.
That's really nice. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that we've talked about before, like, Chris and I really haven't connected, but he's given like hand-me-down clothes to my kids. Come on, like we have bonded in some way, shape, or form. So this is our little community, no matter how much time physically or online we spend together. And so that's just cool.
Yeah, and one other thing about this podcast is that when we started it, there used to be a few of us that were in a local gaming group. Me, Chris, and Adam, as well as we had a few other friends that used to live in Long Beach, California. And so we basically started gaming together online just because right when we kind of couldn't get together in person safely anymore, Adam and I were immediately like, what are we going to do? We can't miss game nights. So we figured out Tabletop Simulator right away and invited Chris. And then since Steve could finally join in, I was like, Steve, why don't you join us? You know, I knew he was regular into gaming. So he's been at almost every game night since then. Now, though, you know, we're all spread all over the country. And so I've moved since then. Chris has moved since then. Steve and Chris actually live closer together than Adam and I and Chris do. And Jen lives right by me now, but we've continued to do it. And it's awesome. I really never want to give this up, even though we have the opportunity to maybe get back and do some in-person gaming, or hopefully we'll get back there sometime in the future. This is awesome. It's awesome being able to connect with you guys and, you know, do this thing that we enjoy together. And the podcast kind of pushes that even another step further, even than game night would. All right, what I'm going to do is we're going to jump in and actually introduce each of us as well, so you guys get a chance, or listeners get a chance to know us a little bit, how we got into gaming and what we love about gaming. But before we do, I got a couple stats about the podcast after our first year. So we've actually officially had 54 episodes. Now, this is episode 53 because the first episode, which is that one I told you about the night we jumped in right after Pan Am and Space Base, that one's listed as episode 0 because we really hadn't intended to record and produce that, but you can go out back and listen to it as episode 0 at the very beginning of our podcast on whatever platform you listen to, because I just thought it was a fun conversation, even though we didn't have a lot of the technical stuff worked out and you know, hadn't fully worked out the format. So you can hear that very first introduction there. But then we also have 53 episodes in the last year because when we did the Dinosaur World episode, we kind of did it midweek. So we released 2 episodes that week. So first year, 54 episodes. We also have done actually 43 different full game reviews. So, you know, there's a lot of episodes where we don't do a review. We call them special episodes, but we do top 10 lists and things like that. We've done a full review on 43 games. Some nights we've done a couple different games together, like when we did Cubitos and Quacksequedlinburg. But, you know, for the most part, we kind of cover one full game on a review night. We've reviewed 43 different games and hope to review many more new games over the coming years. And the one last statistic I was going to share with you is I actually have a count of, out of the 54 episodes, how many each of us have been on. So if my count is accurate, we'll start from the lowest and work our way up here.
I feel like this is a competition I can actually compete at because it takes no skill to be good at showing up.
By my count, I think Jen has been on 6 episodes, 7 including this one. So Jen will have been on 7 episodes. Steve will have been on 10 episodes, including this one. Chris, I'm pretty sure, is going to fall into number 3 because he likes to ditch out for random reasons on a regular basis. Okay, I think if I got this right, I think Chris has been on about 47 episodes. Adam's been on 52, and I've been on 54 episodes of the podcast. So yeah, a few statistics for all of you there. I tried to ditch out on a couple recently when I was traveling, and then these guys wouldn't make a podcast happen without me. So I had to get in there and put one together anyway. But one of these days, you might get the joy of not having to listen to me ramble on in a podcast. We'll see if that happens at some point. All right, so we also want to introduce all of you to us and give you a chance to get to know us as hosts if you care. If you don't, you can drop off now. You already got the review in this episode, so that's cool. But I thought I'd just kind of go round robin here, and I'm going to ask a question and give everyone a chance to answer it and ask each other questions, and we'll get through a few questions. So let's start by just introducing ourselves a little bit. And Jen, why don't you start?
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. I'm originally from Wisconsin, but I grew up in Arizona. And then I spent 13 years in Los Angeles working in higher education in Hollywood before returning home here where I am now in the Valley of the Sun. I work as an educational sales consultant. I tell people, and you've probably heard this before if I've introduced myself, that my goal is to set all the little humans' minds ablaze, figuratively, of course, with the joy of learning, and I work for the absolute coolest company ever. And I love my job.
Are you gonna name drop the company?
No! I get to keep some secrets. So, but if you think about it, like relationships, problem solving, getting support for ideas and collaborating to make something really spectacular, like that's, you know, a little bit of board gaming, you know, how my brain works in my job in sales, and a little bit of how my brain works in board gaming. So I think I'm pretty lucky. Card playing is probably in my blood. We've talked about this a little bit. My family has roots back in Wisconsin. I always say it correctly. My first experience, I don't know if it's my first experience, but my big experience throughout my childhood was a game called Sheephead. It's a card game. It's apparently German, and nobody has ever heard of it. But if you have an Uncle Dan, and most of us from Wisconsin have an Uncle Dan out there, Uncle Dan still plays it. I promise you. So, hi, Uncle Dan. Hope you're listening. Okay, fine. I have an Uncle Dan. But like people have like crazy cousin Phil and Donna and like their grandpa, and those are the people that still play it. And what we learned when Tim and I decided to play it back in the day is that it's a trick-taking game, and you have to get 61 points. And there's some weird partner piece, and it's secret till the end. And I learned to play in my teens, and I have forgotten and been taught over and over and over again by my Lamiran relatives. Lamira is a city in Wisconsin, so hi to them too. We play for nickels, people, and people actually have like a coin purse that's called sheephead money. I love that. Watch out. I laugh, but I absolutely adore it. Like, it binds these people together, and it's like such an awesome shared activity, and I just love it. And so thinking about how that makes me feel really is why gaming to me just kind of like feels like it's in my blood from the beginning. So I actually taught Danielle and Tim that game, Sheephead. Back in Palm Springs.
So I was gonna say, I think the first time that we traveled together as two families, you taught that game to us, and it's one of those trick-taking games that has like a huge obscure rule set. Do you think you could actually teach it today, or would you have to go back to Uncle Dan and ask him to text you the rules? Because I think you actually had to check in with some relatives to get the rules before we played it.
We did check in with relatives. It was crazy cousin Donna, and so we called her over and over again, but she was like such a great sport, and so yeah, she would be so happy to know that like it was kind of like a jumping off point for like us to make a connection that's now like lifelong. So that's kind of cool. But that was actually our second summer game. Our first summer game was Yahtzee. So like that's how far we've evolved, Tim, is that we went from, you know, Yahtzee to a trick-taking game to essentially like Euro strategic games, etc., and then moving on. So I don't know. It's fun.
So I have a question. Are the rules to Sheephead not written down anywhere, like on the internet? Is it something that's passed down by oral tradition, tattooed on some Wisconsinites, and every 75 years that tattoo has to be re-tattooed onto some other person?
It's written somewhere on really old blocks of cheese, is my guess. So
that makes sense.
I can already see episode 54 on the way.
I think a lot of those old card games, you know, it's like, yeah, there probably is like an official rule set, but I bet it doesn't match anything to what her family played growing up. It's like every community kind of passed it down, and then they accidentally inserted little extra rules in it, and so the actual game is completely different depending on, you know, which family you played it with.
Which region?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we did. We had to call, and we had been Googling it a little bit. Again, it was 2017, I think it was. So maybe Google isn't as involved.
Google actually did exist then.
But I remember not.
Ancient times. Nothing was around back in 2017.
I remember not being satisfied with whatever we found on the internet, so we really did have to bring in like the A team in order to make it good. But I don't know. I played all those traditional board and card games throughout childhood. And the kitchen table is what I remember at my mom's house when I was sitting here thinking, you guys played a game for a while tonight. So I was like, I had about 15 minutes to think about this. And I thought about my mom's kitchen table and that she really invited people to play games with her. And whether it was, you know, like Sorry or Aggravation or Skippo or whatever it may have been, we were all welcome. Like my boyfriend in high school would sit down and play board games with me and my mom. Like, that's just cool. And I've never met a party game I didn't like. I love the connection, the conversation, the shared laughter. And I think that's why the Euro strategic games weren't that much of a stretch, right? I like the concept of a game. Tim provided them the gateway to get into these strategic games. And then I liked how they made me feel. It really won me over. And learning something new and making connections and friends is pretty cool. So I was set up for success by Sheephead, though. How cool is that?
I'll jump in next. So this is Tim, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, Scottsdale, Arizona right now, right on the border of Phoenix, actually. But I live pretty close to Jen, and that is almost every weekend that is our activity. Like, Jen comes over with her kids or without her kids, comes over, plays games with me and Danielle. Sometimes my daughter joins in. Sometimes her kids join in. Right now, we have a German exchange student living with us, and sometimes she joins in. But we still play games like basically every. That's what we do. do. We do some rumor mongering, and we just chat and drink and play board games. So I'm in technology. I run part of a company that builds custom software for businesses. So we do e-commerce sites, we build mobile apps, we build business applications, and yeah, it's okay. It's creating things, which is kind of a fun thing to do. But usually, I'd rather be playing board games in my life. So. But if you're ever interested in, if your business needs a business app, reach out to me. I can help you out with it. We do an awesome job. I work with a great team that does that. So let's see. I was playing board games for as long as I can remember. My family, it was just one of the activities that we did. A lot of the traditional games. We actually had our own version of Sheephead. We had a game called Hand and Foot, which is like a canasta variant, I guess. But the way that we played it my whole life growing up, you will not find those rules anywhere on the internet. That is not how the game is played, apparently. But it's still a super fun game. It's a blast. So we'll still get together with my family occasionally and play that. But, we played a lot of other traditional board games, like Concentration and Life, and then getting into when we were getting a little more competitive, and my dad, he wanted to crush us even harder. We'd start playing Risk and games like Stock Market, Monopoly, and things like that. So played a lot of that stuff growing up. What I think really got me into this hobby, board gaming, though, is that when I was in my, late teens or early 20s, my brother introduced me to a little card game. And by the way, my brother is Steve, who's, our co-host here. He'll introduce himself in a minute. But he introduced me to Magic the Gathering. And this was probably, I think the game came out in 93. And he introduced me right about the time that Ice Age was out. So I think it was like 95. So it was just a couple years after the game got started. And as soon as he introduced me to it, I was hooked. And I think I went all in. I went crazy on Magic, and just him and his friends were just playing it casually. They'd pick up a little bit and build a deck and play it. And that was like my lifestyle for the next 20 years. That's all I wanted to be doing in my free time, kind of how I am with hobby board games now. I would go to tournaments every Friday night. I would usually try to find tournaments on the weekend. I traveled for tournaments. I actually got pretty good at it, but I think it's also what drives a lot of my strategic thinking with board games is just, a lot of the decisions and the analysis of everything that's going on in that game. Every card has its own rule set, and everything leads to me looking at a game and trying to analyze what's the most valuable, move you can make right now and the most valuable proposition. Still love that game. I did get out of it because you have to find people that also it's a lifestyle for. To play, competitively and really have fun with it. So I don't play it very much anymore. I have a couple friends that I get together with every once in a while that still like it, and so we'll bust out a cube and play a little bit. But then I got introduced. I had played a few other hobby board games with Steve and with some other friends over the years, but Magic was always my love. And then I kind of gave that up about 6 or 7 years ago.
Tim, I have a question about Magic the Gathering. It's something I've heard about, and I've seen people play it. Help me understand how big it was or how big it is. Like, what are the size of these tournaments? Like, how many people play Magic?
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And it's actually, from what I understand, now I stopped following it too much, but it's bigger than it's ever been. And when I was playing, right now, almost every single local board game store that you can go into only exists because they can sell Magic the Gathering cards and hold tournaments. Like, almost all of their money comes from that. They sell a minuscule amount of hobby board games compared to Magic the Gathering and a couple other trading card games like Pokemon and there's others out there, but it's huge. And so, for example, when I was in the hobby way back when, they used to have a different tournament rating kind of schedule or scale on it. It was called the DCI. And so I had my DCI number. So every time I went into a tournament, I registered my DCI number with the store, and that goes into the official results. And so they would rank you, and you would win or lose, like if you played against someone that was higher ranked and you won, you'd get more points, etc. Pretty traditional matched ranking system. But there was a point where I was looking at my rankings and I was doing pretty good, getting pretty competitive. And I was the number 4 ranked player in the state of Illinois. And that doesn't really matter a lot if you don't know how many ranked players there were. But at that time, there was a little over 10,000 ranked players in the state of Illinois in that one state. So if you multiply that times 50, assuming there's an even distribution, it's probably not completely accurate, but it's probably pretty average. But that's, 500,000 players in the United States at that time. And that's just competitive players. That's people that are going to tournaments. There was a lot more casual players than that. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I think it's fair to say that there's millions of players around the world that play Magic the Gathering. So it's huge.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, I did finally kind of get out. It was just too consuming. I wasn't getting to play it. You know, my wife didn't want to play it with me, and I just didn't have any local friends that were playing it when I was in California. So I got out of the hobby. But then we met some friends that were really into board gaming, and it was like your current modern hobby board gamers, where they invite us to their house for lunch. And you walk in the room and they got a whole huge Calyx shelf full of board games. And I was like, whoa, that looks so cool. So we pulled out a game. I think it was Five Tribes was the first game they pulled off a shelf. And I've been hooked ever since. I still own Five Tribes. I still love that game, partly because it introduced me into it. So that was probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, somewhere in there. I'm all into this hobby now, and now it's completely addicted and think about this all the time instead of Magic the Gathering. So I got my other fix. So Adam, why don't you give us a little background?
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam. I live out in Long Beach, California. As has been mentioned, I'm like the only one left still out here in Long Beach. Currently a pilot, been doing that for 15 or 16 years or so. Started off in the Air Force, so got to travel around the world a bit with that, and that was great. My introduction into the modern hobby games, I would say, started with like Race for the Galaxy. I picked that up when I was living in Nebraska in like, I don't know, 05, 06, and I got into that with a friend and played that all the time. And that was kind of the game that I played. I think somewhere in there, my dad had bought Settlers of Catan at the time. We played around with that. And then more recently, I bought the Firefly, the board game, because I loved the IP, and the game was pretty fun too. So my mom and friends would play that. And then most recently, I got a hold of Terraforming Mars. And at that point, I was like, whoa, these games are fantastic. That was kind of my introduction, my latest introduction in the world, kind of opened my eyes to all the hobby board games that are out there.
How long ago was that, Adam? Like with Terraforming Mars?
I think that was 2018.
Okay,
maybe?
so a few years.
3-4 years ago.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and that's when I really started getting into it, and Board Game Geek, and checking all the forums and this and that, reading this thing and that thing, and I'm wasting so much time on there, and went through like this, the cycle everybody has: acquire. Whoa, I'm getting too much stuff. What kind of games do I actually really enjoy? So that's where I'm at now. Now, how did that all start? And this is where I have so many good memories of interaction with family and friends. My mom would just, when I was a kid, she'd always play games with me. She was an educator, she was a teacher, so I think she thought that was part of a learning process for me. Let's get some interaction in some games. So we had triominoes, right? How simple is that? Match shapes and colors. So I remember that when I was a kid. We had Mr. Big Mouth, where essentially you had these little catapults and a rotating Pac-Man, and you had to time it to get the little chip into the big Pac-Man's mouth. And it was cool. That game was fantastic, man. You had to have the exact right touch on the finger. If you went, full blown like crazy style, you'd launch it over his head, it would smack off his eyes. But if you did it right, you could get him when he was spinning away from you. His mouth is just barely open. You had the right touch on that thing. You could launch it like through the side of his mouth and get that last chip in before he rotated back to you. So that always felt good. Every time we'd go camping, my grandpa was big into camping and cruising around all the Southwest and rock hounds. So we'd always play some card game or another, whether it was Tripoli, some game I felt like he made up called Casino. We'd play that. Rummy was another one. So just great memories. I got my little mind got exposed to the darker side of life when I played poker, and we bet, like Jen was saying, they had the nickels and stuff, and they would give me all this change, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just won $1.25, but it was like the hugest thing to me back in the day. So just great memories associated with board games growing up. Me and my friends would play party, and Balderdash was huge for us. We'd come, home from college during the summer after a day at the beach. Let's go over to Brandon's house and play Balderdash. So it was just a fun way to hang out, and I just have such good association and memories and interaction from playing board games. So I think that carried through, and that's something I still look for and crave. And I think it's a great way to meet people and interact with people and discover what, a little bit about how their brain works.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what board games mean for me.
It's funny, Adam, I didn't even know anyone knew Balderdash. I thought that was some like obscure game that showed up one Christmas and then went away, because my family had that, and I played a ton of that when I was right out of high school and stuff with friends, just party game type of thing.
How great was that game?
Yeah.
It's like increase your vocabulary, try to get the other guy to guess yours, try to, there's so much strategy you could do in that game, like make your definition sound like a Balderdash definition, and then I don't know. Yeah. Great game.
You say that, your mom used games with you, kind of to see how your brain works. I think that's the basic message that you're getting. And it's funny because as an educator, I think about those things with my kids. Like, what are they learning from this? How is their brain growing? Where are the connections going, right? And so I love that. Again, you've told me so many great stories about her, so that's a wonderful thing to think about. But I think that, so I'm thinking about today. So my kid's home quarantine today, and there's no homework right now sent home. And so I was like, we're gonna do some math. I literally Googled, you can play war. You can play war with addition, and boom, like for like an hour, this kid is super happy playing cards with me and also learning math facts, right? Whereas math facts like scare the pants off of him, playing card games don't. He loves them. Like you can see his little body light up and he's so excited. And now he's got his addition facts now up to 13 because that's how we're using the cards. And so it's kind of neat.
What my daughter learns from playing board games with me is that dad has no mercy and that nothing in life is fair.
I think all of us have learned that from you. Yeah.
Adam, I did mention, I kind of skipped over because I talked about playing games with my family and then getting into Magic. But, it is funny that even I got my first apartment when I was 18 years old, and I would have friends over and we would just drink spiked coffee and play Uno until like 3 o'clock in the morning. Like games were just an activity that, it's just a fun thing to do instead of just like hanging out and, talking BS or watching TV or something like that. Like that's what we would sit around and play games all the time. So Steve, what about you? Why don't you give us some background?
All right, well, this is Steve, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I love it here, and I work for a software development company. I'm a software developer. Lots of game time with the family, as Tim mentioned. Board games, card games, word games, trivia games, all kinds of games. Lots of family events, playing penny poker. Always loved poker. Played a lot of dealer's choice poker, so a lot of different poker games going on there. Later on, board games with friends. Axis and Allies, Dungeons and Dragons. It's not really a board game, but there's some similar components there. That sort of relatedly led into the Magic the Gathering introduction and a lot of other similar type games like Vampire. Played Magic the Gathering a lot, on and off, but always casually until Tim started getting into the tournaments. And then I had a lot of fun going to some local and state tournaments with Tim and some of his friends. After that, oscillated a lot back and forth. Casino games, which aren't board games necessarily, but still have a lot of similar components with statistics and odds and things like that. So lots of casino games. Played a lot of games like Catan and Munchkin and more lightweight type games for a long time with a lot of friends. And I don't know. I've basically been playing some type of game most weeks of my life.
Yeah, it's funny. So I think Steve introduced me even as an adult to a lot of games that are classic hobby board games like Catan and Carcassonne and Ticket to Ride, 20 years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I was so into Magic that even though I enjoyed the time, like learning those games and playing them with him or his friends or my family, I never really got hooked because I was so into this other game. But it's funny, Steve's really been kind of like leading me through my whole gaming, adulthood. And, our family's always played games. But now, Steve, I want to ask you about Dungeons and Dragons because when we were kids, we used to always want to play Dungeons and Dragons. We never had any of the source books, but we would make up our own characters based on how we thought it played. We'd make up all kinds of games that might use that type of dungeon crawling mechanism. But the first real experience I had with Dungeons and Dragons is that Steve, myself, and two of his friends at the time, this was probably right after I got out of high school, decided that we were going to do a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. So we went to a local hobby store. I bought my first whatever the D&D second edition, this player's guide. I think I bought one other handbook or something like that. I was so excited to get into it. His friends had a bunch of books. We go to their house. Steve's DMing for us, just kind of making up the campaign as it went, but it worked totally fine for me. And then one of the kids there just screwed around and totally ruined the whole experience for me. Like just, went in there and was just like, oh, I'm just going to do this stupid thing. And Steve was like, okay, roll for initiative. And he was like, I'm going to do this stupid thing. Well, roll for charisma. Oh, okay, Tim just got killed by this poison arrow from a tree. I mean, it's just like, it turned into such nonsense. And that's always turned me off. I've never wanted to do a role-playing game like that again. Do you still play? Because you've done more recent Dungeons and Dragons campaigns with your friends. Have you found a group that just does it, like has more fun, or do you actually like that kind of complete random silliness in something like that?
I don't mind a little bit of silliness, but anything beyond that completely turns me off in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't mind the role playing at all. People that get into character and they want to talk about stuff related to their character or do things that their character would do, that's totally fine. As long as you're still casting your spells and, stuff when you're supposed to be. I don't care what you talk about. But most recently, there was a board game tap room not too far down the street from me. It was a bar that you paid $5 to get into, and they had 100 games in there, and you could play whatever games you wanted to. And they had food and drinks and stuff like that. And they were one of the locations that was a regular spot for a group that I participated with called Orcs. And it was a Dungeons and Dragons group where every month they would organize this big thing and you could sign up and they'd bring in professional DMs. There was usually about 10 groups going at once, all in one big room usually. So they would be what they called one-shot campaigns. So you'd come in and you'd start a story with your group and you'd finish the story that same night with your group. And you'd get some little items and you'd get some experience. And then the next time you came back, you could bring your character back and it would be a new story with probably a different group of people and probably a different DM, but all organized through the same structure. They do raffles and they'd bring in food or they'd make food at the place, and it was usually at a tap room or a tavern. So it was with a semi-professional commercial group that I actually played with for the last couple of years. Unfortunately, they had shut everything down with the pandemic, and that particular game store has gone out of business.
Oh, that was a cool tavern. You brought me to that place when I was out there last.
Yeah, but they could not do the social distancing. They unfortunately went out of business. But so that I loved that format. It was great for me. Prior to that, I have done a couple of scripted official Dungeons and Dragons campaigns with various people, both in person and on a couple of different online platforms. I have DM'd or we co-DM'd a bunch of those campaigns, and I love Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm not a very good DM, so I much prefer playing. As far as the nonsense goes, the problem is with some groups is that it's one of your friends, right, that's being silly and wasting everyone's time, and you can't kick him out, right, because then he's not going to come play with you anymore. But at these professional, semi-professional events, if you're doing stupid stuff, they're just going to kill your character. And you can sit there all night if you want to, but you won't be holding up the group anymore.
Right on. Well, if I ever play Dungeons and Dragons with any of you and one of you is doing stupid stuff, I'm voting for you to get killed, to get kicked off the island for sure. All right, Chris, so why don't you give us a little background?
Hi, this is Chris, and I live in Portland, Oregon. Only recently, before that, I was living in California, in Los Angeles, or Long Beach, not too far from where Tim and Adam were both living, and before that, about pretty much everywhere else in the country. I was in the Army for 10 years, and so moved around a lot, pretty much everywhere. But finally landed in Portland, where I am now. And I'm an environmental attorney. I love my job, but I also really love games. And this is an interesting opportunity to think through really what was my game origin story and what was it that drew me to them. And I wish I had some great story about way back in the day when I was a kid and had, this game that just like captured my heart. But in reality, I didn't have that. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And so my mom didn't like to throw anything away. So I had this huge bag of bottle caps. And we had this game that we would play out of this huge bag of milk bottle caps. And I don't remember anything about the game other than it was something like checkers and it involved milk bottle caps. The other thing that really brings me back to my youth was that I grew up in the 80s in the time when every game was very toy-centric. Hungry Hungry Hippos and Don't Break the Ice. And here's the holy grail of all games that I remember from when I was a kid. It was Dark Tower. I remember looking in that Sears catalog next to the Hummels and the Bejeweled swords, which actually, for those who are not old enough to remember, they actually had that kind of crap in the Sears catalog back in the day. They had like medieval weapons like you'd find at a Renaissance festival. In addition to that, they had Dark Tower, and it was just this beautiful hunk of plastic and technology, and it was so impressive. And for God's sake, it had Orson Welles doing the commercial for it, and that stuck in my mind forever. And in the present day, I'm actually waiting for the Kickstarter on Return to Dark Tower, and I'm incredibly excited to play that. That's my memory of games from the time when I was a kid. Now, kind of jump into the future, or jump into the present, I love hobbies. I have way too many hobbies. My wife likes to give me crap by telling me I married a themed husband. I don't think she necessarily means that as a compliment, but I just love hobbies, which is why my Twitter handle is Too Much Enthusiasm. So it wasn't a real stretch when Tim introduced me to hobby games that I would get into it, especially with the toy factor. Going back to what Tim was saying, he picked this up from a friend in Long Beach, and then Tim passed it along to me. He invited me to a game night, and I think this is back, I actually had to go back and look at some old text for this, but I believe it was around 2017, mid-2017, that we started doing a relatively regular weekly game night. And that became a little bit more of a regular weekly game night, and that kind of got some more and more serious. And then I met Steve, and we played a couple games, and then Adam got involved. And once those guys were in, I was like, man, not only do I like the games, I like the giant toys, and these guys are just fun as heck to hang out with, so I think I'm all in. And then COVID happened, and then what else is there to do but play games online, right? So that brought me full circle to just how great games are.
I think I remember the first game we did for a game night. I think it was Clank in Space. And I had finally started to buy a couple of games for my own collection because our friend Randy at the time had his huge collection. So, but I started to really get into it. I bought my first game. I met one of my other local friends there, Brent, and I was like, Brent, dude, you want to play games? And he was like, yeah, I used to play Magic the Gathering. So I invited Chris, I invited Brent. The four of us got together for our first game night, and it was Clank in Space was the first game, and it was about 2017. That sounds right. So right on, Chris. No, I remember when I first introduced you to games, you knew Catan, though. I think you had a copy of it. So you had played some hobby board games before you were introduced to me. Was that the only one?
I mean, really, that was about it.
Okay.
And I think the real turning point was 2018, if I'm remembering right, that you sent me an email and said, hey, I know you're into H.P. Lovecraft, and there is this Kickstarter happening on a game called Cthulhu Death May Die. And I looked at it, and it was like love at first sight. And I backed it. And I think, second to you, Kickstarter is the thing that most attracted me to gaming. Because, I mean, I love the games, but I also love the process of Kickstarter, of watching the game come to life. From that point on, I just started backing Kickstarters. And the more Kickstarters I got, the more Kickstarters I played, the more games I played with you guys, I went all in on it and just absolutely fell in love. And to this day, my favorite games, I think, are the ones that I got through Kickstarter.
Yeah, I created a monster.
A good monster, though.
All right, so now that you know all of us, what we're going to do is I've got a few rapid-fire questions about games that I'm going to ask really quickly. Everyone's going to go around and answer it. So you get a little peek into how we think about games and what we love. So let's start with, in the same order we did this, Jen, what was the first game you remember playing?
My first game that I remember playing was totally Candyland.
Okay.
Short funny story about it is that I knew that one of the cards on there was bent, and I knew it was one of those candy cards that would get you to the end. And so like my early days were not the moral and ethical ones. And anyone that knows me now would be shocked that I actually, like, this revelation I'm having that like I cheated in Candyland when I was like 4 and 5 years old. But like my brief loose association with the truth is like, now with kids, I know that 4 to 5, totally developmentally appropriate. So I feel good about it.
All right. My first game that I don't know for sure because there's a number of games I have early memories of, but I'm going to say Life. Like, that's an early game that I remember playing very young, sitting on the floor in our basement with my family sitting around it. So I think that's one of the earliest ones. What about you, Adam?
It's got to be, it's fuzzy. Triominoes or Pickup Sticks or like Hungry Hungry Hippo or Mr.
Okay.
Big Mouth. One of those.
Okay, sounds good. Steve?
I'm going to have to say Parcheesi or Sorry.
Yeah.
One of those two for sure. Something like that anyway.
Yeah, we played a lot of those. Chris, What about you?
The weird homemade bottle cap game that I talked
That's
about.
right, yes.
Which I can't say anything else about.
Is there no rules for that on the internet you can find?
No, I don't think so.
We need to find the rules.
Okay.
We need to find original components and rules of that one and give that one a whirl.
I wish
Okay,
I still
so
had that bag of bottle caps.
So what was your favorite board game as a kid?
That one for me is easy. It's a game called Aggravation. It's like a roll your dice and move your colored marbles around the board, and there are shortcuts. First one to home wins. Did anyone else play this one? No one ever knows about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a very similar. I think it was based on Parcheesi, which was like a European game that my mom loved. But I think Aggravation was a very similar type of game. And in fact, very similar to the game that was my favorite as a kid, which was Sorry. which is awesome too, because I got to just play Sorry with my daughter has a copy of it, so I still play with her, and I actually still enjoy that game. Like, it's such a simple game, but it's still fun. There's a little bit of push your luck with it, like, oh, if I take this decision, then my guy's still at risk. If someone else draws a Sorry, I'm in trouble. So it's still a fun game to me, and a lot of that is the nostalgia of just loving it as a kid. What about you, Adam? What was your favorite game as a kid?
Man, there's a few. So we played a lot of Monopoly, and then I think there was Solar Quest, was just basically a spin on Monopoly where you're the spaceships flying around and you can enter orbit for different planets, buy up all their moons, and if someone got trapped in that orbit of that planet and they, landed on one of the moons there, they'd have to pay more depending on how many moons you owned. So I just liked it because I loved space and planets and learning about all the different names of the moons around each planet. And the game was crap. That didn't matter. It was me and my buddies hanging out, flying around space. That was a cool part to us. So I'm gonna go with Solar Quest on this one.
What about you, Steve?
Oh, hard decision. I mean, as a kid, it's such a broad range, but I do remember liking Stratego a lot.
Yep.
And also Risk too. I liked both of those games quite a bit when I was a kid.
Yeah, cool. What about you, Chris?
Hungry Hippos, man. I mean, the depth of the decisions that you're making in that game are incredibly intense. No, actually, I love the toys. I love the fact that you're sitting there slapping the butt of this, hippo so that it's eating marbles. I mean, what's not to love about that?
Chris is like, it's got a miniature in it. I liked it.
Yeah.
I don't care about the gameplay.
Yep.
All right.
Great theme.
Well, okay. So let's see how we all changed. So what's your favorite board game today, Jen? Go.
Jen, what do you want to say about Chris's thing too? You're busting up over there.
Like the quote of the day is like slapping the butt of the hippo. Like, this is a board game podcast, and that was just said out loud. So it's pretty amazing. All right, ask me the question again, because
What is your favorite game today, and why is it Castles of Burgundy?
Exactly. Thank you for customizing that question for me. My favorite board game today is Castles of Burgundy. Duh. Everything about Castles of Burgundy feels intentional. I default to that love of tile placement games because of it. The strategic nature of it feels good in my brain, people. That brain puzzle. The ugly nature doesn't bother me. You all can talk about it all day long. But I love that shared narrative that it gives me for all my friends that play it with me. Like, that I can walk past a farm and, like, that sheep over there is a 2-pointer. That's amazing. So I like it. And it's Castle of Burgundy. For me, like, it's a warm hug from a good friend. It's like that first sip of red wine. And I like, if I'm going to be really honest in my dating profile, in all capital letters, it should just say, I just want to drink red wine and play board games and find someone that gives me butterflies. Like, the end. And I just can't imagine why that statement right there wouldn't bring, like, all the boys to the yard, right? So, thank you.
It's a great point. So for me, we just recently did our top 10 board games of all time episode, and obviously that can shift over time. But right now, I'm going to stick with what I said was my number one at that time, and that's Anachrony. And Anachrony just is a perfect fit for me. I love worker placement. I love Euros. I love that type of worker kind of action selection. So worker placement's always good. And I loved themed Euro games, and Anachrony is great. It has a fun sci-fi theme on it. It's got time travel. It's got a lot of chunky, interesting decisions to make. So Anachrony is just like a perfect game for me. What about you, Adam? What's your number one? Has it changed for you at all?
I'm going to cheat like I always do on these. So Smartphone Inc. is creeping up there, but I think still Dune, Imperium. I also got a shout out to Star Realms. The more I play, the more I want to play. That's mostly due to Chris. That game is amazing. And then if I'm going to go big epic game, then I'm going to say Eclipse. So mixing up 4 games into one answer.
So 4. Okay, 4 number ones. Perfect. All right. Got all those in there. Okay, what about you, Steve? What's your favorite game right now?
Well, I was going to say Eclipse, but Adam stole my thunder. No, but I guess I'd say Eclipse right now. Nice. But I haven't played it a whole lot, just a few times with you guys. So, maybe once the shine wears off, it won't be my all-time favorite game ever, but if I had to pick one right now, it would be Eclipse.
Well, that's where we're picking it is right now. All right, perfect.
All right.
Chris, what about you? What's your favorite game of all time right now?
Yeah, hands down, Star Realms. It's my favorite game now. It was my favorite game when I started playing it. It'll probably be my favorite game on the day that I die. I could play Star Realms every day. In fact, I'm playing a game of Star Realms right now as we're talking online. And I love that game. It is a great game. But just because we're on a show that talks largely about, big strategy, hobby games, like that kind of game, my choice for big games Terraforming Mars. It's amazing. There's just so much depth to it, and with the big box expansion, with the aftermarket pieces, it's also a beautiful game, not just a great game with ugly cardboard pieces.
Chris, now, when we did our top 10, I don't think Star Realms or Terraforming Mars was your first, was it? What did you have as your first at the time? Do you remember?
Pretty sure it was Star Realms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right,
I think
fair
I said
enough.
I
Cool,
had to say
cool.
Star Realms, even though it wasn't a big game. It's just, it's
Okay.
my favorite. It's a love.
Okay, cool. But Terraforming, even though you've been playing a lot of TM, it's still a favorite for you right now.
Yeah,
You're still happy with it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, cool. All right, next question. So this was supposed to be rapid fire. That wasn't that rapid, but so what is your Grail game? What's a game that you really want to play but you haven't had a chance to play yet? Jen?
I don't think I really have a Grail game. I think that I have like some leftover from like that special episode that we did. I'd still like to play Pandemic, but I think it's still close to home at this point. So I feel like I need to play it, but I'm just not ready yet.
Okay. So mine right now is a game called Rococo. It's a game about ball. It's a game about basically dressing people and putting on the best ball. And this is a game that I've been really interested in since like. Come on, guys. Okay, well, I'm going to explain why it's my Grail game, and it's because I know that you guys are not going to want to play it with me, so I haven't played it yet. I haven't made you play it. But I was really interested in this game back in 2017. It's a well-known Euro game, but it's got a very unique theme. And I was on sale on Amazon when I was first buying my first few games, and I was so tempted to buy it. And I didn't. And then it went out of print for several years, and you couldn't get it at all. And then there was a big Kickstarter for a deluxe edition of it. Ian O'Toole redid the artwork on it. They added some expansions in. They added a solo mode. Still super tempted to pick it up. But again, I don't think it's ever going to get played with anyone I know. The solo mode doesn't seem like quite the right fit for me. So I still have not played Rococo. I really want to play it. So listeners, if you tell us that you want us to review Rococo, I would love you for that, because then the rest of these guys will maybe play it with me.
So Tim, the largest laughs in that were from me, and I will say that while eating my hat, because I said the same thing about Obsession, and I had a freaking blast playing Obsession, so I will play Rococo with you if you want to play Rococo. In fact, I will tell you, the next time we play a game, I will pick Rococo if you want me to.
Oh, right. Yes, that's exactly what I want you to do.
Rococo.
Yes. Excellent. Well, at least I got something out of tonight's episode.
I've said it on air.
All right, Adam, what is your Grail game? What's the game you really want to play?
To piggyback on that, I will absolutely play Rococo. It's just hilarious to me, these themes that you find, and that I want to try them. It sounds so great. Who can put on the best ball? Tim can, obviously. All right, my Grail game is Chaos in the Old World. This is a creatures on a map game. I think Chris would love it. If he hasn't heard of it, he needs to check it out. It's an Eric Lang game, Chris. This game looks epic. I think it's kind of I've heard Cthulhu Wars was loosely based on this. I don't know if that's true or not. But this game with that I think it's Horned Frog or Horned Rat or something expansion, they're no longer in print. They're like go for $1 billion on the eBays. So it's your classic Grail game for me. I'm never gonna be able to find it, probably never play it, but it looks so amazing, and I'm sure I'm overhyping it in my head.
Chaos in the Old World, I think, is based on, isn't that like a 40K? It's like a Games Workshop license, right? Where they make a whole bunch of miniatures, skirmish games, but there's a couple board games that were based on
I believe so,
stuff.
yeah, and I've never really followed Warhammer 40K, but that sounds right.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that whoever published that game originally, because Games Workshop wasn't doing board games at the time, so they would license out their IP to other publishers, and whoever published that game eventually lost the license from Games Workshop, and it's unlikely they'll ever get it back again. So that will probably never be published. But from what I've heard too is that Sandy Peterson essentially just like stole everything out of Chaos in the Old World and dumped it into Cthulhu Wars. So I'm sure it would be a lot of fun. I bet Chris would totally dig it. All right, Steve, what's your Grail game? Anything that you really want to play that you haven't had the chance to?
I have not gotten to play Gloomhaven yet. That seems interesting, so I would like to play that.
So, Steve, I've got a box of Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. It's sitting in my house. I will never play it until you are here. I'm waiting to play it with you. So, absolutely, that's the only reason I'm holding on to that game. Because I think that you'll love it. I think the two of us doing that campaign together would be a blast. We can do it like we did that Near and Far campaign. You'll come out for a weekend and we'll just play through the whole thing. Just play nonstop.
Man,
it'd be a lot of fun.
I love doing that campaign with you. That was just such a blast.
All right, Chris, what is your Grail game? What is something you want to play?
So that's an easy one. I already gave you guys a teaser on that one. It is Return to Dark Tower. Actually, I want to play Dark Tower and then Return to Dark Tower. Just saying those names brings me back to that Sears catalog. I don't know that I'll ever get my hands on a version of the actual original Dark Tower, but I kickstarted the Return to Dark Tower. I'm so excited to get that in my hands, and that is it.
Chris, so what are the latest updates? Do you have any idea when it's expected to be completed and shipped?
I just got an update, I think today, and they're well into production. Of course, like everything else, there's a lot of things holding up the international shipping right now. So I imagine that it's going to get slowed down just like everything else, but they're well into the process. So I'm hopeful that it'll be, a few months, couple months, whatever, before they actually start shipping. But that is one that I'm literally on the edge of my seat waiting to play, because that'll bring me right back to 1981. And I think they even have 8-bit sound in the tower just for the fun of those people who grew up with the original one.
All right, nice. Okay, so the last two questions. Number one, was there a game that you bought after we reviewed it? So in other words, we played it together for a review episode and you loved it so much that you bought it. Jen, any games that inspired you?
Herbaceous.
Oh yeah, right. Yep.
I had a lot of fun playing that one, and it was easy and fast, still strategic. Chasing after that biscuit is, I don't know, it's fun, it's tasty. The table talk is cute too, and then the kids like it now, so like my oldest requests it.
Nice. So I actually have a few I'll list really quickly. The first was on the same episode as Herbaceous, but we reviewed Raja the Ganges, the Dice Charmers, kind of a last minute decision to play that as a second game for the night. And I picked that up, the print and play, and I love that game. I've played it dozens of times. I always want to sit down and play that fun little combo-y game. The second one that I think I picked up was, actually this was right before that, but that was Whistle Mountain. Adam, Jen, and I reviewed Whistle Mountain when it first came out, and I got that. I was on my Christmas list and someone gave it to me as a Christmas gift, so that's in my collection now as well. I wish I could get more plays of it. My wife didn't end up liking it, which I was hoping she would, so it's not getting around a lot of play around here, but I do hope to play that some more. And then the last one that I got after we reviewed it, actually two more, Viticulture, which is a game I had played years ago and always had it in mind. And after we played it, I loved it so much that I bought it and really digging that game. And then Dune Imperium. I think Dune Imperium is the last one on my list, and that's one of my favorite games of all time. I just played it 2 nights ago with a local game group gathering, and I had a blast playing it. So those are 4 games that after we reviewed it, I liked it enough to play. What about you, Adam?
There's been 2 that I'll say. I think Red Rising was one of them. We played that, and I thought it was just nice art and a beautiful looking game, and I wanted those foil cards. So I have that. I don't play it as much as I thought I would, but I don't think I'm going to get rid of it. I think it's still a pretty fun game. And then after you guys talked about Star Realms, I got interested and bought that app, and then have since bought all the expansions for that. So those are the 2 for me.
Just on the app, though, you don't have the physical version of that one?
Right, I don't have the physical.
Okay. What about you, Steve? Any games that you bought after we've reviewed it, or you've listened to one of our reviews?
Cubitos is,
yeah.
I think, the only game that I've purchased.
Right on. Chris, what about you?
Very recent one, actually. Just last week, we talked about Windward, and for those who listened to our review of that, I wasn't 100% on that game, but man, did it stick with me. And I bought a copy of it last night, as a matter of fact. It was on sale on Amazon, and I got it because it just fascinated me. 2 very similar games. That one, Windward, which I actually think I liked better on first play, and Australia, which I didn't love on first play, but just kind of stuck in my mind in a way that I just couldn't quite explain. That one I still might buy, but Windward is on its way, and it should be here, I think, Wednesday, and I can't wait to open that one up.
Awesome. All right, so one last question then is, since we reviewed a game, if you were on a review episode for it, is there a game that you've shifted on since we reviewed it? Like you had a strong opinion, you really liked it, but now you don't like it as much, or you really didn't like it, and now you're coming around to it. Jen, any games that you played and now maybe you don't feel the same way as when you first reviewed it?
I don't think I actually have an answer for that one. I know that you guys influenced me one time, so one of my games that's still like on my grail list was influenced by this. So I'll go ahead and answer that way. It was the very first episode. I wasn't on it. I was listening, and you made me want to play Pan Am, and I am still waiting for like my costume and cocktail party out of that, because just like how it was explained and the banter that was going back and forth, you're having so much fun talking about playing it that it made me 100% want. I think you've sent it to me like 3 times in a link, and I've still never purchased it to this day, but the reality is that I probably should.
All right, I'll jump in. And this is one of the things that I always like to reiterate about our format. A lot of the times when we do an episode, we have just played the game one time the night right before we play it. And I think that matters. Like you sit there and you review a game. You play a game, we get to just kind of spout out our feelings on it. And sometimes they're really positive. It was a really cool experience. And sometimes you're down on it because of one thing that happened or whatever. And that's not necessarily going to be how things last. So I have a few games that I've shifted on a little bit. I'm not going to go too much detail. I'm only going to give you one tonight because I actually do want to do a separate episode where we go into our wrong hot takes and can kind of revisit some of the games we've done in the past. But the one I'll call out, I think, is Tungaru. And that's a game that I was actually quite positive on when we reviewed it. I liked the whole package of that game. But then since then, anytime when I thought about the experience of the game, what I remember is repetitive gameplay and just kind of, like it felt like it lasted too long. Now, I don't think that makes it a bad game. I'd like to go back and play it some more. But I think that my initial impression, the way I spoke about it that night, quickly shifted shortly after that to be like, wait a second, though, did I really have fun playing that? Or did I really enjoy that experience? That's one of the rarest cases where I really liked the game and then my thoughts on it have gone down. But that's without even playing it again. So that's one example where I'm not as hot on it as I was right after we played it and we reviewed it. Although I would love to revisit it again. What about you, Steve? Anything that you've shifted on since you talked about it on the show?
No, I don't think I would adjust any of my opinions on any of those games. Partially, most of them I haven't played since that time, but my feelings haven't changed about them.
Okay. All right, Chris, what about you? Anything that you've shifted on since we played it?
I think for me, it's less a question of shifted on a game rather than been fascinated by the idea of going back to it and checking it out again. And the ones that I mentioned before, Australia and Windward, which I ultimately ended up buying, are probably the two best examples of that. Ones where I thought there was something about the game. There was enough wrong with the game that I was really skeptical of it when we ended up doing our reviews. But then on reflection, there was enough there combined with, for me, I'm a sucker for good theme, with a good theme that I really want to go back and revisit it again and honestly hope that I was wrong the first time and find out that they were way better than I originally remembered them being.
All right, cool. So I think that will wrap up our questions, and hopefully all of you enjoyed that and got a little peek into who we are and what we like in games. I think that will wrap up our big 1-year anniversary. We've been talking for several hours here, so thank you all for listening. Thank you all for supporting us and backing us over the last year. We've had a blast making this. I hope we keep doing it. We love interacting with you guys on social media. All the folks that chat with us and reach out to us and email us, even the ones that hate us after some of our comments. I appreciate you taking the time and writing to us and that you're actually listening. So thank you all for being here. Hope you stick around. And otherwise, until next week, take care, everybody.
Later, y'all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
Have a good night.